I want to say this morning we're also gathered, of course, to be able to honor and feature one of our very own, Kwaku Larry Crowe, whose family roots are deep here in Dayton. For almost the last quarter of a century, Larry has served as the lead interviewer for the History Makers, the nation's largest African American oral history archive. When you see the archive, you are seeing the work of one of our Dayton's finest. This is why we're extremely pleased to welcome the founder and president of the History Makers, Miss Juliana Richardson. Not only is she a Harvard-trained lawyer, but she has taken her passion for our people and her hard work and dedication to create this amazing resource. So, Juliana, please join me at the podium, and I want to thank you all in welcoming her here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Today I'm actually a Buckeye, raised and born in Newark, Ohio. A lot of people don't know where that is, but it's near Columbus and Denison University. I can't tell you how much it means to be here today and how wonderful this library and the library staff is. I'd like to take them with us. Seriously, I want to do a very special shout out to Kim Dellinger, who's events manager. She was fabulous. The amazing Aaron Smith, who was just standing next to me, fabulous. And I want to also thank Brent Boyd, who stepped forward. He's from Cincinnati, but he's a Dayton native. Scott Stearns, our videographer for the past 25 years. And Carol Wolfook, our stage manager. Ola BC, the engine that made a lot of this happen and brought people here tonight. Today. So this is really an important time. And for those of you who don't know us, I want to start with an excerpt that aired on us on 60 Minutes 3 years ago. We were in the last day of Black History Month. Yep.
At a time when we're having a national discussion about how Black history fits into the American mosaic, we discovered that many stories of Black achievement are slipping away, going unpreserved for future generations. A nonpartisan, nonprofit organization called the HistoryMakers is hoping to change that by creating an expansive digital archive of first-person accounts.
Wrong statement, right, thank you. Thank you. There's been we're in hard times right now. We woke up and the nation's at war with Iran, which is crazy. There's been a full frontal attack on the teaching of on Black institutions, Black women, the teaching of Black history and the humanities, and the threats to erase our history. This is a time that my heart has felt reflective and my soul alarmed. But I decided, like the middle of last year, that we were just going to keep our head down and focus and keep our work, and we're going to come out on the other side. The piece that was done, sorry. I'll go on, sorry. It's okay. Okay. And stories are what we at the HistoryMakers are all about. I want to, today we're really showcasing our digital archive, which is fundamentally very important to us. What we were known for many years, my stage manager as I sit here, was our evening with programs. Here, our digital archive was created by Carnegie Mellon. It's a collaboration, amazing collaboration between a research institute and a small African-American nonprofit organization. It started with a project called Infomedia Digital Video Library. It really is one of the precursors to what we know as modern-day AI. But it took us 10 years to get to the digital archive, and how we supported, how we funded ourselves, because foundations would not fund us, was through a program called An Evening With. It started in November of 2000 with An Evening with Harry Belafonte. I just want to show you a tribute clip to that part of our story. So while we were having, the Evening With program that aired on PBS, we were working very, very hard back at the HistoryMakers to build what I call the golden goose, and that's our digital archive. So I want to just educate you a little bit about us. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. In 2012, the Library of Congress became our permanent repository. We're housed right up there, which is the National Audiovisual Conservation Center, which was built with the largest gift to date of $163 million by a man named David Packard of Hewlett & Packard. And then we're piped by 75 miles of fiber optic downtown. Now, you know the changes that have happened at the Library of Congress, and I want to say it's important to know that we have also 4 separate repositories. But the significance of the HistoryMakers is that there had only been one attempt to record the Black experience with the first voice, and that was with the WPA slave narratives until we came along. That's 19th century history. But there had been virtually no attempt to record the 20th century if we had not come along. We came along just really at the nick of time. This is the back of me touring what is our collection at the Library of Congress, the day that we celebrated in 2014. We define a history maker one of 2 ways. someone who's made significant accomplishments in his or her own life. And then the scholars came in to ask us to record people who are associated with particular movements, organizations, event, or time periods that are important to the Black community. We have done over 4,000 interviews, and Larry Crowe, who we're honoring today, sorry, I keep saying tonight because it's dark, so, sorry. He has actually done over 2,400 interviews for us. He's our lead interviewer, and he's done that with a lot of dignity and commitment, and so we're very, very, very appreciative of him. These are our Dayton history makers. You see, we only have 8. Bing Davis, if you're in the room, I give you a shout out. 4 of the people that we have interviewed have passed away. Our earliest recollection goes back to the 1700s. That's someone's memory of their family. We've done interviews in 451 cities and towns. The youngest person at the time of interview was 28, Aisha McMillan, who was a prima ballerina. The oldest was 109, Louisiana Hines, out of Detroit, Michigan, who was Rosie the Riveter, one of the World War II Riveters. We have tons of content in our digital archive, thousands and thousands of subjects that are literally, look at this, look what the library has done. It has made it free to you to get in there and to have a ball. There will be no Black history after this, after you get access to this. I mean, there will be, it's just filled with information. I want to just briefly talk about something that is sort of near and dear to me, because halfway through the project, it hit me like a ton of bricks, that society favors those who have documentary evidence of their value, and that in the Black community, we have not necessarily taken that seriously, and we need to get our act together in that way. So, you know, the Rockefellers, the Fords, the Whitneys, no one's calling them shithole countries. And we have to realize that. Now, I want to say this photo here was on the building of Andrew Young's brother's dentistry business that went back to the practice that went back 100 years. In the middle is, and these are all Presidential Medal of Freedom recipients. So in the middle is Reverend Joseph Lowery. He was one of the first people to pass away during COVID. To the left gives me the chills because that is Reverend C.T. Vivian and Congressman John Lewis. They die on the same day in the order that they're pictured here. And then to the left is Hank Aaron. And then up until last week, I would have said that there's also Andrew Young, and he and Reverend Jackson are the best known, and so now we have Andrew Young still. And Andrew Young believes in archives, but I start to look and realize that archives are mainly on colleges and universities, public libraries here, and that's why I champion the work that Karen is doing here, because it's really important. And I just want to share, and then there are historical societies, but I want to share with you, because I'm the type of person that's what I do. I go around and I visit archives and I ask what they have about the Black experience. So I was at WashU and I asked the librarian, you know, what they had, and she lowers her head and says, you know, they don't have much. And then she, it was like a light bulb went on, and she said, but we have the largest collection of Black Sambo. She didn't mean any harm at the time, but that's what they had, and it was a full-color, 100-page brochure on that. I want to ask the audience, just as a part of sort of a Q&A, okay, there's the Army Heritage Center. They have 25 million for digitization. Almost no one has 25 million. They control all the content for the Army military museums. How many Black people do they have in their collection? Come on. You know what? You're right. I have to, okay, I'm in Dayton. What can I say? Okay, so they have Benjamin O. Davis, Sr., not Jr. We got them Toga West. They have 2. They haven't digitized those 2 collections, and I consider that somewhat of a crisis. A lot of people ask me about General Colin Powell. I know some things went up for auction. I think they're still being held in the family archives. So I started to look at our history makers, and I realized that we were doing these stories, but literally a fraction, like a teeny fraction of 1%, had any repositories for their papers. So we got Angela Davis. I got her into the Schlesinger Library. No one had asked her. Jesse Norman, I got her into the Library of Congress, and Tom Burrell, if you know him, he's from Chicago, largest black advertising agency. He took himself to Duke, where he's in the collection on advertising, the only collection on advertising, and he's the only black person there. So we have our next initiative is what we're calling our digital library. And it's really, we're focused on preserving 20th century African-American collections with 21st century solutions, digitizing first and processing second. For those who are traditional archivists, that sometimes seems problematic, but it gets the job done, and it gets it done quickly. And then the other thing is that we've been led by this brain trust here who's been literally meeting with me every month since COVID. And so we now have, for 80 people, our video oral history interview. We have the biographical database, a huge database, and digitized materials. So we're now the digital repository for Eartha Kitt, Franklin Thomas, Susan Taylor, and Ed Lewis, who's the founder. And I want to say there's a tragic story around Essence Magazine's archives. All the letters that were sent to her, all the original artwork, were housed in a warehouse. No one can find any of it. It is gone. It has vanished. Dorothy Height, we have Alexis Herman, who was actually the keeper of Dorothy Height's papers, so we're digitizing those and making them available. And this was our celebration that we had this summer on Martha's Vineyard. So we're now a petabyte in size. And for those who don't know what that is, it's 1,000 terabytes. There are very few people or entities that can take care of a collection that size, but our collection will continue to grow. We also, education is really important to us, and in a couple weeks we'll be holding our Innovation and Pedagogy Conference with scholars and K-12 teachers and students coming from around the country. And that's what it's really all about. That's what we've been working at the HistoryMakers to make happen. We're in 260 minutes, it said 187, but we're now in 200 subscribing institutions. You see here in Ohio, it's the College of Worcester, Denison, Ohio State University, University of Dayton, and then we're in these public libraries. And I love the public libraries because I'd love to be in every public library, so I want to champion Dayton Public Library for doing what it has done. So I made a veiled reference in 60 Minutes about, or at that point about, growing up, because I really did not know my history. And, Dayton was a big city. I'd always hear about Wright Pat and Central State and Wilberforce. And so we at the HistoryMakers really we didn't have a roadmap. And we had to really build our bridge as we crossed it. And we really want to be, and my dream is, that we're going to still be relevant for the child who's not yet born. That's what our focus has to be. Now, oh dear. Sorry, my goodness. We're a small and mighty team at our organization. It's hard for people to think that we've done all that we've done with literally an average of 10 people working on the collection. It's hard to think that the interviews were done with a total team, a videographer team that really numbered 2 people, and an interview team that has numbered 2 or 3 people. That is hard to imagine. thousands and thousands, 15,000 hours of testimony recorded. And at the lead of that is someone who, as Karen said, needs no introduction here in Dayton. He loves his family. He loves his kids, Zeke and Shawnee. He loves his wife. And Zeke and Shawnee, it's wonderful to have you here, along with your mother. He has a profound love for his community. He talks about Dayton's contributions to the world, and he loves Black people and our history. And he honors each and every day our ancestors with his profound thirst of knowledge and the breadth and depth of his study. Larry is well-read. And we are so very honored and pleased to have him as our lead interviewer. For us, over a 24-year period, he has interviewed, as I said, over 2,400 African-American leaders in 451 cities and towns. Larry Crowe, the son of Frank and Helen Crowe, it has been a true honor to work alongside of you, to have your dedication poured into our archives the way you've done so ably. Our ancestors will say you have been a faithful steward in protecting and preserving the legacy of Black people. Please, Kwaku, Larry, Franklin Crowe, join me on this stage. Let's see. Okay. You know, we do interviews all the time. Larry was supposed to be last week during that horrible storm. What was going to be this week? This just a few days ago. Week, yeah. He was going to be both at Brown University and Yale University interviewing people, and the storm took us out. But we travel under all kinds of conditions, and are you proud of what you've helped us build?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, I get good feedback, which is good. I mean, the people that don't like it, I guess, don't say anything. But the feedback is good, and I enjoy it. I take them all seriously. These are people's lives, and it's an awesome responsibility to try to get their stories straight. And it's fun. It's something I was meant to do, I guess, in some ways. And listen to people's stories.
Very much. We were introduced to each other by a woman named Valerie Ward, who I had come in as a young lawyer to represent Kumba and theater, and you were there. And I remember when she said, you should look at Larry Crowe.
Yeah, people don't know Juliana has a background in theater. She loves Black theater. So she was on the board of the great Kumba Theater Company in Chicago that Val Gray Ward finally got me to be a part of. And I was with Val for a year and a half, I guess. And then I moved over to the African American Arts Alliance. But she was on the board. That's where I met Juliana.
Right. And so that was actually, in many ways, Larry, a fateful thing for both of us. And for what we have, and I can tell you that every, in our office, you're like godlike. They go, Larry Crowe.
If you think about it, I've been involved in history for a long time, but Juliana gave me my first history job at the age of 52. It was the first job I ever had in history, because, I went to Wright State. I left before I graduated, trying to change the world in Chicago. When I came back to Dayton in 2006, I finally got my degree from Wright State in history and marched, But, yeah.
Now, our interviews, they're typically 4 hours to the longest is 15 hours. The longest one in one sitting was the interview you did with Leon Dash. That was
Oh, yeah.
12 hours. I want to start here with how we typically start our interviews, Larry, and that is we ask people favorites. Now, I have to say that there are many interviews where Larry goes, management makes us ask
Compels
these
us.
questions.
Management compels me to ask these questions.
And I would hate that. But since, we start, I want to start out with our favorites, and I want to ask you, what your favorite food is, Larry.
Probably pizza. I hate to say it.
Your favorite color.
Blue.
Your favorite, not black. Okay. Your favorite time of year.
Probably Black History Month. I think because I took it as a charge to read as much as I could about black folks. Nobody's making me do this but I would like read slave narratives. I read all kind of stuff during Black History Month. So I became familiar with a lot of material because I just made myself do it. I do it all year round, but Black History Month I doubled down on it.
Yeah. And what about your favorite phrase or saying?
Oh, there's several of them. One from my parents is the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I heard that, and they provided a moral underpinning for everything I do. And from Dr. Jacob Carruthers in Chicago, the founder of the Kemetic Institute and the first president of ASCAC, the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, he said Larry Crowe, reward for good work is more work. And the last one, let's see, what was the last one? The last one was, that's two, but yeah, that's two, that's enough.
You know what? Then Jacob Carruthers, he was saying it right because all I do is give more work.
That's right.
So I think about we're here in Dayton, and Larry has made sure that Dayton is well covered within the archives. He's always finding Dayton connections. But I want to start out and use the digital archive to help sort of guide some of our storytelling today. And I like to start with Manning Marable.
Yeah. Now, he's somebody that we interviewed from Dayton. He wasn't in that 8, but he is. He's from Dayton.
That's right. That's right.
And people have argued with me. I know in Chicago, Dr. Anderson Thompson said, no, Manning Marable's not from Dayton. I said, yes, he is. He's Bill Marable. We all know him in town. And, so anyway, he's one. Joe Madison's one. I made a list of about 16. I forgot to bring it, but that are from Dayton that we've interviewed.
Well, there's also Ray McGuire.
Ray McGuire, the top black man in finance on Wall Street. Grew up on Kennard Street here in Dayton.
So I'd like us to play this clip of Manning, and you should set him up also about who he is, Larry.
Oh, Manning Marable is one of the preeminent black academics of the last 50 years, I guess. Is author of many books, including Blackwater and the last book on Malcolm X, the full name of which I can't apprehend right now, but it was a controversial book. But unfortunately, he passed away of sarcoidosis. He had lung problems, but he was a good brother. And I met him in Chicago. He came to the National Black Independent Political Party meeting, and that's where I proved to the people in Chicago he was from Dayton. Yeah, but he's a well-known scholar. I went to Earlham College, and
Well, let's take a look here.
In Dayton, where they were teaching, the schools were legally integrated. Schools were integrated.
Yes.
Yes.
Technically.
Technically. So what is that?
But because of residential patterns, and because there were no magnet schools back then, Negroes lived on the west side. Schools on the west side were black, even though technically you didn't have de jure segregation. You had de facto segregation because of redlining and discrimination in housing policy. Not a single black family lived in Oakwood or in Kettering. These were white neighborhoods in the southern part of Dayton. Jewish people generally lived and were confined to Dayton View. through the same pernicious form of discrimination, except it was anti-Semitism rather than white racism, anti-black racism. Black people were confined to the West Side. That's where we lived. We attended the schools there. And my mother was an elementary school teacher. I went to Edison School, which was a couple blocks away from Paul Laurence Dunbar's home.
You know, so I don't want to lose this opportunity. I want you to talk about the West Side and where you're growing up, but I want you to also talk about the importance of Paul Laurence Dunbar.
Right. Paul Laurence Dunbar, you know, he grew up in Dayton, went to school in Dayton, and when he graduated from high school, I think in 1892, he was the only black graduate, but there were only 20 graduates in the whole class. Nobody went to high school in those days, hardly. But Dayton is largely defined by Paul Laurence Dunbar, and by the time he had traveled around the United States and made his mark as the poet laureate of the Negro race, and came back to Dayton, where he lived in a house on the West Side that he bought for his mother Matilda, and which is on Summit Street. It's now Paul Laurence Dunbar Street, but in terms of the schools, what Manning was talking about in terms of the schools, the first school that was intended for black people, as the population kept growing, they knew they wanted to dedicate a high school to black people, to contain us on one level and to make sure we stayed in the neighborhood. And that was Dunbar High School, created in 1933. And the tacit agreement was if you were black, you were going to go to Dunbar. That's where my mother went to school. It's not like you couldn't go to another school, but you really weren't encouraged to. Dunbar High School's athletic teams couldn't play the athletic teams of the rest of the public league, the white schools in those days. So even in Ohio, you have this kind of segregation. In the West Side, as we spread from the initial stronghold there on Fifth Street, where we had 2 black theaters, all these clubs, we had 12 black doctors. I don't know what they were all there for, but lawyers, all kinds of people. Moses Moore had a black hotel, a couple of them, I believe. He founded the Dayton Marcos baseball team. All this is going on before 1930, and some of it continued on. But Dayton, as the black migration kept going on, black people moved further and further west on the West Side and became associated with the West Side to the point where when I came back to Dayton in 2006, and now we're living not only on the West Side, but on the Northwest Side, some are even living on the East Side and all other places, when someone got shot on television and said, a 45-year-old West Side man was shot today, and he didn't even live on the West Side. But a West Side man is a black man in Dayton.
Right. Yeah. But I want to take you, Larry, because I would be remiss if I didn't ask about your background.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You know, because that's part of what we do. And I'd like you to first tell me about your father.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my father was from Princeton, Kentucky. He came up here after World War II. He had been a mess sergeant in the Army. But he grew up on a farm. His father was a school teacher.
His name?
Frank Crowe. Yeah, Frank Crowe. He had another name, but we won't talk about that. My sisters are here. But he went by Frank Crowe. So they know what I'm talking about. Look, so but Dad, he was a hard-working man, and he was initially interested in becoming a carpenter. But in fact, he set out. He joined the Carpenters Union. He was able to join it, but he wasn't. By that time, by the time that struggle was over, he had been offered a job by Inland Manufacturing, General Motors, and my mother urged him to take it because you have benefits. You know, even though it was, not the greatest work, in the world to spend your all day doing, he had benefits, and so all of us kids got, to go to the doctor, and we had other, and so he had a nice retirement package at the end. He spent 30 years and he was done. But he also always had a barbershop. So Dad would go to work, get to work at 6, work until 3, get out of work, drive down 3rd Street, get out, go in the barbershop and cut hair to 6:30, 7 o'clock, and come home, eat his dinner, fall asleep on the couch watching Candid Camera or something, And he was That was his. But he always had time for us to take us on drives and stuff. Let's go for a ride. Remember those days?
That's right.
When your dad said,
right
"Let's-"
after church, a lot of
That's
times.
right. Let's go for a ride. Everybody get in the car, and me and my sister would fight for the window seat, and we
right.
and we would go for a ride. So it was. Interestingly enough, we moved like 3 or 4 times. We ended up growing up on South Kilmer Street. I was at 109 South Kilmer, and my neighbor Dale Smith is in the audience. I saw him come in. Raise your hand, Dale. And Dale and David Matthews, who's also a poet, inspired by Dunbar. He lived across the street, and he's a musician and everything now. But they're here, and we had a field behind our house. We would play ball in. It was an old minor league baseball field called Hudson Field. But I'm going off the subject.
No.
But Dad, you know, he was like many people. He was a hardworking man who came from the South, grew up in a rural community. You know, my mother.
And there's that
Yeah.
Kentucky to Dayton. There's a lot
Yeah,
of that
well,
Kentucky to Dayton's.
In the early days, it was Eastern Kentucky and Middle Kentucky and West Virginia. I know Mayor McGee was from West Virginia, you know, his family. The early Daytonians came in through the West Virginia side, then up through Kentucky and Tennessee. I know Dale's people were from Tennessee and Mississippi. His father worked for McCall's, which is the largest web press in the United States. They published not only McCall patterns, but all of the magazines that were distributed in the Midwest. It was a huge plant. I forget about that.
And then your father's, running a barbershop, and you know the role of barbershops in our. That's where, men are raised. You hear all the things that were going on in the community.
I'd hear all the stories, you know. That's where they would tell. I'd come in the shop and they'd say, "Crowe's boy is here," you know.
beyond
you
good
can't-
behavior.
That's right. So I'd sit there and listen, you know, and that's when they said, "Did you hear old Red got shot?" I said, "Oh yeah, he was out on. I saw him on the street the other day." He said, "Yeah, because he shot another Negro. If he'd have shot a white man, he'd have been under the jail." I heard that kind of talk in the barbershop. You know, it made me think like, whoa, what kind of world are we living in?
So now, what about your mother? Let's talk about her, because she was a force to be reckoned with too.
Yeah, she was tough. And Mama,
Her name, Helen.
Helen Crowe, she had a finger like mine. She would point it and said, "You know better than that." But she grew up in Dayton. Her mother was single. Her mother's family was orphaned when they were little in Kentucky, in Mount Sterling, which is eastern Kentucky. And one by one, they came up to Dayton. And her mother's sisters and her mother, they did day work and were maids, you know. My mother's mother got a job at the Biltmore Hotel. Then she had another job, because everybody had to work 2 jobs just to be poor. She had another job boxing cakes at Andrew's Bakery in the arcade, you know. But she would bring home, you know, lots of sweets and stuff like that. But my mother, she grew up during the Depression near those first 3 blocks of West Fifth Street, where the theaters were and all the nightlife. She lived in over 33 different places. Sprague Street, Fifth Street, you name them, Randolph Street, all around that same area there, Bank Street, because her mother would fall out with people. She lived there for a minute, and she'd fall out with them, and then they'd move to another place. But Mama went to the same grade school the whole time, Garfield. It was all in the same area.
But she was active also in your school.
Oh yeah, Mom was. She got pregnant in high school. She had my brother, but World War II hit, and so she got a job at the base putting together warheads on bombs.
At Wright-Patt.
At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. She was in a special room because if the room should blow up, they didn't want it to blow up the entire base. She told us this. So she did that at Wright-Patt, and she saved her money. Her mother, as I said, was working as a maid at the Biltmore. She met my father at the Biltmore Hotel. He was working there before he worked for General Motors. And he came over and had dinner, and that's how they got together. But Mom she knew a lot of people of substance on the West Side, and they knew and liked her for some reason. And a lot of the doctors and the professionals, she knew their children, and she would come in the house and talk to them. And she knew the Parks family. Henry Parks, who's the founder of Parks Sausage, who we were talking about this before. Parks Sausage was the highest grossing black business in the United States at one time. They sponsored the World Series on the radio. But Henry Parks grew up on the west side of Dayton. His sister, Jean Parks, was a singer who was on the cover of Jet magazine 3 times. She dated Malcolm X. She's mentioned in the autobiography of Malcolm X. They go to see Billie Holiday together. I mean, so Mom knew all these people, and she had a sense of civic pride and responsibility. So when I was at Weaver School, she became the president of the PTA. She was, and she was able to form a committee to go downtown to confront Mr. French about adding a new gymnasium to Weaver School, which was built in the 1880s. I always thought her committee went down there with her, and 3 years ago, she passed away at 100 last year, as did Dale Smith's mother, just past year. But she went down there, but she said, "Oh no, they didn't show up. I went down there by myself."
Well, Larry.
But they got the gym built, new gym, with a.
Larry, I mean, that's what, that generation and your parents are typical. They were really very aspirational and working really hard to make it for a family. And I want to ask you what your earliest memory is of growing up.
Oh, watching my brother playing marbles, I think. I remember being in the crib kind of vaguely, but.
There are a few people like that.
I was.
He's one of them.
Yeah, I used to stay in the crib and hold the bars and listen to music on WING and all that. But I was, I have always had a memory that I've, in discussion with other people, a lot of people don't have that kind of memory,
Now, when you're growing up, what are the streets you're living on? You said
South Kilmer Street.
Kilmer.
Yeah,
Oh,
near Roosevelt High School, and I went to Weaver Elementary School. When I, at the end of my freshman year, my parents took advantage of the civil rights agitation, really, and moved into Dayton View. We were the second or third black family to move on to Philadelphia Drive when we moved there. And we ended up going to Fairview, which was the highest academically rated high school in the city. And I was not the highest academically rated student, but I'm in Fairview. My grades are okay. I made B's and A's and C's and stuff. I didn't.
But before Fairview, you were at
Weaver and then Roosevelt.
Right, at Weaver. Was Weaver when you were in school with Joe Madison?
No, I was at Jackson. I started kindergarten at Jackson.
Okay. That's right.
But Joe was in my class, and that's when I found out I was black. Because Nick wrote in because somebody asked me, "Are you colored?" I said, "I don't know." So I went home. I asked Mom, if I was colored, and she said yes. And I said, "Oh." And I said, "Well, what?" I had to try to figure out what that meant, So I went back to school and said, "Yeah, I'm colored." And then so they said, "Well, so is Joe, and so is." And I said, "Okay." So Joe Madison and I later were in Boy Scouts together with Henry Foster and Troop 33 out of St. Margaret's Church, and we went to Woodland Trails Camp and all that. But, yeah.
Now, what sights, smells, and sounds remind you of growing up in Dayton?
Oh, the smell of inland manufacturing, that rubbery smell. It can remind you of Dayton. It reminds you of home. When inland was still in operation, when you'd smell that, you felt like. My sister she retired from inland. She knows what I'm talking about. Is that smell, that rubbery smell. That and the trains. When I moved back to Dayton, I noticed the train whistles hit at a certain time every day. And where I live now is close enough to between West Side and Dayton View, but I hear those same train whistles. In terms of sounds, West 3rd Street, West 5th Street, Germantown. There were so many businesses and people were doing all kinds of things. I mean, you were in an urban, world. Now you walk those streets, they're empty pretty much now. But it was really, black people were coming up here from everywhere, getting these jobs in these factories. Delco, Frigidaire, McCall's, Inland's had 3 plants, the right past an Air Force Base. A lot of jobs here in Dayton. And so people were just surging up here to get them. and you saw a lot of black people. I remember walking with my first cousin from our house on Kilmer down to my father's barber shop, and every 5 steps, this is cousin Jimmy, he would stop and say, "Hey man, what's going on?" He would talk about something, I mean, it was just so much activity,
Community.
Yeah, community. There's a lot of music in Dayton too. In those days, we played the music real loud on the radio. Everybody could hear it out in the street. We had a Zenith with a lightning bolt on it, which showed what kind of power it had, I guess. But and a lot of bands.
You
Yeah.
had diverse music playing in your house.
Oh yeah, we heard country music at home. Then usually pop, and of course everybody went to the record store. Then you had a black record store, and you go to the record store and you listen to music that white people didn't hear. Pretty much, they never heard it. So we loved James Brown. My sister Shirley used to rock in the rocking chair to James Brown. She had a rhythm to her rocking, But and a lot of we saw the beginnings of all these funk bands in Dayton in those days. I didn't know it at the time, but Wilson Pickett's band was the Ohio Untouchables, who became the Ohio Players. He lived in Dayton for 3 years and went on the road with the Ohio Untouchables. So the people that perform Lakeside, Slave, Roger, and all the other groups here, a lot of musicians here.
Okay. And what about church, Larry?
Church, we attended People's Community, CME Church.
So you're a CME. You're raised CME.
I was raised CME. We started off as Phillips Temple, which is the big one. But my parents, when they moved to Kilmer, People's Community was right around the corner. So I could run down the alley from my house and be at People's Community. And I had to pass by People's Community to get to Weaver School, which is where I spent like most of my grade school life from first grade through, 8th grade. But so church was interesting. We had a lot of wonderful people in church. But when I was about 11, I started like falsifying religion. I hate to say, a lot of people think, oh, how horrible. But I started thinking like, what if this is true? Then why is there so much, why doesn't God stop some of the bad stuff that's going on in the world? Or why doesn't, I asked a lot of questions. And I know my dad's answer to a lot of them would be this. He would do that. But I started questioning a lot of stuff, and I was allowed to. That's the great thing about my family. My grandmother, who raised my mother, she was considered herself a Christian, but she didn't walk around reading the Bible all the time and telling you. Nobody did that. And we were regular churchgoers, and I was an usher in church and had some good people, as I said, in the church, but we didn't hear much about ourselves, and I used to wonder why. Why didn't we, when I first got an inkling that we had a history that was separate from what you see in popular culture, everything was white, at school and everywhere else. I said, well, where's our stuff at? And why aren't we talking about it?
I want to actually, that's a good segue, because I'd like to go to a clip of Alice Wyndham, but I'd like you to set her up and tell who she is for our audience who doesn't know.
Oh, Alice Wyndham is one of the brightest women I ever met in my life. She grew up in Southern Illinois, and we interviewed her in St. Louis. But she got involved in diplomatic stuff with the U.S. government at one point. But she was not a government agent as such, or she was for black people wherever she was, and she's the one that had the house in Ghana that Maya Angelou lived in. It was Alice Wyndham's house. And so when Maya Angelou was stuck there after her son was in this horrible auto accident in Ghana and was in the hospital, she stayed with Alice Wyndham. When Malcolm X visited Ghana, he stayed with Alice Wyndham. And the picture of him sitting in the airport with a dashiki like the one I'm wearing here and a suit and tie on, that was shot by Alice Wyndham. Alice Wyndham is a photographer. She's famous for going to Mexico and uncovering the Olmec, She did that, but she's really a genius. A lot of people don't know about her, but we're glad that we interviewed her so we can.
So let's go here, because I want to tie this into your awakening, because Black history was all around.
She's going to be talking about Central State, because she went to Central State.
On her part, that she would have been happy if I'd chosen Illinois, but they were fine with it. Yes, because I had good reasons for where I felt I was in my development and what I wanted out of the school, that I wanted to be around black people and to be taught by black people.
Now, did you know about Charles Wesley before you?
No, that was a wonderful surprise to find this distinguished gentleman who was a historian of Alpha Phi Alpha, the black labor movement. I mean, he was an historian and had worked with Carter G. Woodson. Oh, no, he was a wonderful surprise. Again, an excellent model of how you behave, how you sit through long, boring lectures when we had to go to chapel, and sometimes we would be bored. But we would watch Dr. Wesley, and he'd be on the stage, behind with the guest, and he was always, eagerly listening. And I know if I was bored, he had to be triply bored. But Central State brought everybody in the black world who was advancing our struggle. They came to Central State, and because we had those compulsory assemblies, not the Sunday service, but we had assemblies once a week that were compulsory. That's all gone now. They don't have those anymore. But we got a chance to hear Thurgood Marshall, Jay Rogers. I first heard him at Central State. Historians, folk who were doing things, were invited speakers, and that was wonderful exposure.
Okay. Now, Larry, I want to take that a little bit, but I want to go back to Fairview, because Fairview, you basically integrate Fairview, right?
Yeah, there were like 6 black students that graduated with me in 1967, and I can name all of them, of course. Most of them were from Sean Akers Children's Home, and I think the 3 that lived in the district were me, Scooter, James Edwards, and Ethel Blackman. And we graduated in 1967, but Fairview, as I said, was a top-rated academic school in the city. I wasn't the top. I did okay, but we would send like 2 students to Harvard every year. We were rivaled only by Chaminade High School or Julianne, the girls' Catholic school. Mm-hmm. They had like scholars that would.
But you end up going to Wright State, and Wright State is, you go in 1968 when a lot is happening.
When I graduated, my mama took me down to Elder Bivens and got me a job moving furniture. And so I worked that job until my father got me on at Inland, because he'd been there so long, he knew he could get me on. So he got me on at Inland. He said, "Now, boy, you can buy your car, get married, buy a house."
And that's what people did. You got on, right?
Yeah. He said, that's what life's about. So I worked. I said, I'm not going to like this. I had a kind of easy job, though. I got a job in general services, and I was sweeping the floor and doing stuff like that. But we had a strong union, and I knew I'd only do so much every night. So I had time I would sit in the president's office reading Time magazine and, other things. Well, and I would talk to the engineers. I would sweep out the lab, the latex lab and the paint lab. And I talked to Steve Pettiford and other people that went on. These are like black engineers that are really smart guys. We had like great dialogue, and that has informed my interviews with scientists. I did a little science in school, but I knew engineers, and we would talk about things. And I started saving my money. I didn't know how to go to school really with a grant. In fact, I was ashamed when I took the SAT to apply for the United Negro Scholarship Fund. I didn't write it down because people might think I'm a Negro, which I think everybody knew already, but those were, my identity wasn't like that. I said, well, I don't need no handout, I'll just save my money and go. And I did. I would save money, then I'd take a leave and go to Wright State, or then I tried to do it at the same time. It was too much, actually. Dr. McStallworth asked me, "Sir, do you have a headache or something?" And I was like, nodding in class. So eventually I got out of, I stopped working at Inland and I worked a summer job with Theater West. That's how I got involved in the theater. And I worked with Clarence Young III with Theater West. We had funding from through Model Cities, and it was like student work study. But that opened up a whole new world because you had people there from Wilmington College, Antioch, University of Dayton, and the students at Antioch were like gods. They knew everything. They could do everything. Antioch being the most liberal college in the United States. But we had people from Central, and people came all the way from Philadelphia. Were going to Antioch, different Boston.
But you become very active. And I mean, we wouldn't have, there would not be a Belinga Center if it weren't for you. So you should talk about it.
Myself and others. Linda Gillespie's here. I don't know if Carolyn Wright's here or not, but we had a crew at Wright State. We had demands in to the university in 1970 that surprisingly paid off. I was surprised as hell that we got money to have a Black Cultural Center. This was one of the ideas I thought was that I sponsored the most, the idea that we needed a Black Cultural Center. And they let us choose our director, which is even crazier, I thought. At the time, I knew that was special. So we interviewed candidates, the Black students, and we chose Dr. Yvonne Reed Chappelle. And she's become a great mentor of mine, still close to me. I talked to her like 2 weeks ago. I told her we'd be doing this. But she can't get around like she used to, or she would be here. She was at my wedding,
Right. Let's take a look at this. This is Dave Chappelle's mother. And you interviewed her.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the archives early.
In 2003. Now, this was done in Cheverly, Maryland, near where my son lives now.
The students and the student involvement. I remember that among the people we had in our first year, for the opening itself, I remember that we arranged to get David Driscoll, the artist, to bring paintings by Jacob Lawrence. He was at that time curator of some of Lawrence's collections or series, and the series that he came to the center with was the Toussaint Louverture series, detailing the history of Haiti and the revolution and the life of Toussaint Louverture. Very important and very symbolic for African Americans, because this was the first revolution in the Americas that put an African community in charge of government, to leading a country, to lead a country. So this was the first Black republic in the New World, so to speak. So I was excited about having that series there, and about having David Driscoll as a featured guest.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, David Driscoll, he was a noted curator that we also interviewed and helped build many, many collections.
I believe, and a lot of the people I've interviewed who are art historians now believe he was the first really serious Black art historian.
That's right.
David Driscoll.
That's right.
If you ask people now, you ask each other, who are the Black artists? What would people say? In 1968, we'd say Bing Davis, and then we'd draw a blank. We didn't know any other Black artists. David Driscoll had a slideshow with, here's Horace Pippin, Jacob Lawrence, Charles White, Faith Ringgold, and all of them coming in succession. He showed us, and he talked about each artist. Then we bought the collection, the slideshow, and we put it in a little kiosk in the Belinga Center. We ran it all day long. Here are these artists coming by again. And so everybody learned who the Black artists were.
And Larry, this time period, we're really learning about ourselves in many ways. We're like little kids really learning and being thirsty, and there's a lot of activism happening. I want to know, how is this period, when you look at that period, that time period in Wright State, and then your eventual, then is that like almost 9 years later you moved to Chicago? But that time period of Wright State, how would you say that you changed, and how did it change you?
Oh, it made me more insufferable in discussions, and because I knew I knew more than that's pretty much. I learned more and more. Personally, of course, it's just about growth. I want to know everything. I heard a couple times. Yeah, I'm sorry, white people. White people that come in, they're experts on black people. I said, I don't want to. I'll listen to them, but I want to be the expert. I want to be the one. And and I haven't had a platform for it so much, but I want to be the one that knows the most.
Now,
Yeah.
I want to take us, because a lot of our work, I want to take us to You're Starting With Us. And
Okay.
we've done all kinds of interviews.
Yes.
And I want you to talk about the first interview you did with us.
Okay. This skips over a lot of stuff now. And I'm just
Okay.
going to mention some of this stuff just
Okay,
real
go
quickly.
on.
Yeah. I worked for the city of Dayton for 2 years with under Bob Lewis, Division of Youth and Manpower. A lot of great people with the city. I learned a lot about life working for the city. And then I moved to Chicago and worked. Before I moved there, we founded an organization called Al-Kabelan and Msengiwa, and we used to bring in John Henry Clark, John G. Jackson, all these different black luminaries, and I would go to the airport and pick them up and drive them around, just like I did at Blinken Center. So I'm meeting people like Alex Haley and Chancellor Williams, and So when I leave Chicago, I already have a connection to the Institute of Positive Education with Haki. That's where I met my first wife, who's the mother of my children. There, she was a teacher in the Shule there, and at the Institute of Positive Education, which was a black collective that was trying to liberate our people through education and communication. We had Black Books Bulletin we published, Third World Press. We had a school. People will say we should be teaching our own children. We were doing that. That's why I went there and joined that organization, to put my shoulder to that wheel. And it was work and more work, But the money started running out. As it ran out, I worked for Kumba Theater. That's where I met you. Then they hired me as director of African American Arts Alliance of Chicago, which the funding eventually ran out for that. And I worked for Chicago Alliance for Neighborhood Safety, doing community organizing all over the city. I did that for 9 years under the direction of Annie Russell in Chicago. And that brings me to when the city killed Chicago Alliance. That's when I came. Somebody said that you could make money doing.
You also were active in the Harold Washington campaign.
Oh yeah, and when I worked for Kumba Theater, right, and I still had ties to Third World Press, I laid out a couple of important posters for the Harold Washington campaign. That was a really powerful experience. And I had one idea that was produced by Conrad Worrell called "We Discovered It, We Should Govern It." And it had a picture of DuSable on a banner, and we have it in someplace you saw it. And Harold Washington is looking sideways at DuSable, and the slogan, "We discovered it, we should govern it." Conrad took it to with Harold Washington. They went to Minister Farrakhan's house, and discussion was, what could Minister Farrakhan do for the campaign? And he said, I can produce 1 million of those flyers. And he did it. And they passed them out at L stops all over the city. Now, I used to take my children to the Chicago Historical Society, and they could see the flyers on display and at DuSable, and and Chicago Public Library. So that was to let them know, even though we were poor, Dad did something.
Well, the activism that started with you at Wright State, you take really into Chicago and continue that, right? Because there was Kabul. Is it Kabul?
At Wright State, that was our black organization, and that was founded by a brother from Springfield named Tom White, Selman T. White. He went on to become city manager of Ann Arbor. He's still alive in Reading, Pennsylvania. We should interview him. But he knew how to organize, and he used to tell us, you don't put all your business out in the street. If you have a black organization, you meet and you get yourself together behind closed doors before you meet with others. Then you represent your people. When you go to another group, you don't just always are out in public as a single Lone Ranger. You don't really represent anybody. So that was one lesson. And I went to meetings with him. I was fascinated with what he was doing, and he would let me go to meetings with the president, and we would sit down with Brage Golding, the president of Wright State, and talk. And I said, well, it's one of these pinch yourself moments. So what am I doing here, meeting with the president of the school? You know, like I always feel that way when I interviewed Dorothy Height.
Right.
You know,
Well,
what am I
let's
doing
go
here?
to the Dorothy Hyde interview because there's some interesting history. I want to go back to our first interview, but after let's listen to Dorothy Hyde here. Does everybody know who Dorothy Hyde is? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, Rosalie Bradley there. She's a regular member of the National Council of Negro Women, been a member for years. Mm-hmm. Life member, yeah.
Life member of NCNW. Yep.
Yes, when I was in graduate school, there was a student, one of the students who was a journalism student, and he complained constantly about this demanding job he had at the Negro World, which was Marcus Garvey's newspaper. And so one day I convinced him, I said, well, why don't you just give that job to me? And he said, well, maybe that they won't want you. I think he wondered whether a girl would be taken. And I said, well, let me go and see. So I went up to see Mr. Merchant, and I was employed to take that job. It was one of the best things that ever happened to me because I've had the experience of seeing the Garvey principle that black has to be excellent in work at work.
You know what? That's interesting. I remember when you first told me about the interview with her because when you think of Dorothy Hyde, you don't think of Marcus Garvey in one. So talk about that.
Well, yeah. Well, I thought what was interesting about Dorothy Height's interview is that she grew up in a coal mining town, just like your father did.
That's right.
And
Right,
she grew up poor. And, you know, you always see her in a hat and all the dignity and everything. But she wasn't born with a silver spoon in her mouth. She was born poor. And she walked around, despite being poor, she always bore herself with a kind of dignity and seriousness that I asked her the question. I said, have you always been serious? And she said, what do you mean? She said, I said, you seem so serious and dedicated all the time. How did you? She said, yes. She said, people used to ask me when I was growing up, little girl, why are you so serious? And she said, the answer was, it's because I am.
But think about that. She is informed by Marcus Garvey.
Yeah.
And you actually went on to interview Marcus Garvey's, is it son?
I didn't. I think someone else did it. Someone else did this interview with Marcus Garvey's son. But I was a member of the UNIA in Chicago under President General Charles James from Antigua. You know, I was a member. He made me join. He heard a lecture I did on Garvey and says, young man, you ought to join the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League of the World. What organization is that, you might ask? And he was going, the organization seeks to unite some 40 billion Negroes. And, yeah.
Now let's talk about your first interview with us. Because I tend to be a taskmaster, and I was nervous because, it was 2002, right? We traveled to New York. I take you on a trip to New York. We've done some training. We don't have our procedures sort of all lined up at that point. And who do we do that trip?
We interviewed Al Sharpton, the critic,
Stanley Crouch.
Stanley Crouch, Hal Jackson, the disc jockey. We interviewed one of Joe Lewis's girlfriends that he set up with a liquor store. She was famous in New York for having this crystal apartment. Everything was made out of glass. The hairdresser, John Atchison. Atchison, yeah. And it was quite a lineup of people. And I asked, Scott, who's back there on the camera, the white guy behind the camera there, is waving. Scott said, Larry, you'll never get a chance if you don't say something to Juliana, because she's like a steamroller, she's not going to. And I said, well, can I interview the last person?
That's right.
And she said, do you know who it is? This is Gardner Taylor. Have you ever heard of him? And I said, yeah, I actually had. When I thought about it, he was the founder of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, which is significant. I always stop on these points when I do interviews, and people mention National Baptist Convention. It is the largest black organization in the world. It was then, it is now. Most people don't know that. If somebody asks you that question, what's the largest black organization in the world? It's the National Baptist Convention. And Dr. King went to it as a little boy. All the Baptist ministers went to National Baptist Convention. So anyway, Gardner Taylor, along with Dr. King, were kind of pushed out of the National Baptist Convention by Joseph Jackson, who felt Dr. King was a rival for amongst the membership, because Dr. King was doing civil rights work. Jackson countered by saying, you need to worry about saving your soul and not worry about civil rights, which is jive, but
but he in that interview, I remember sitting behind you when he talks about the fight that.
Oh yeah, but they had the National Baptist, the Progressive National Baptist Convention was formed when there was a convention in Kansas City in 1961. Joseph Jackson thought he'd be voted out of power, so he had his ministers lock the doors of the convention center during the lunch break, and the other people couldn't get in. So they formed a flying wedge, old football move, and crashed through the door and pushed the crowd back. And the crowd, as it got pushed back, they bumped up against a riser that was holding a 90-year-old reverend. He was sitting on the top row with only a curtain behind him. And he fell off it and broke his neck and died. And that was a big tragedy. Dr. King and Gardner Taylor were smart enough not to be there during that, push.
But it was there, that listening to that interview with you doing it, that, you realize that we're finding history in places that we don't always recognize. We'll, see it and learn, and firsthand accounts.
Yeah, well, he said, the interesting thing about Gardner, he had a lot of great points. He talked about how he became a Christian minister, because he was really an agnostic in college, at Leland College. He was reading Robert Ingersoll and challenging the seminarians, but he decided he was in a car accident, which changed his life. He was driving the president of the university's car into Baton Rouge, and a couple of white guys in a Model T sideswiped him. But the Model T was one of the lightest vehicles ever made, and it just flipped into a gorge and caught on fire, and the white guys, one survived, I think the other one died, but he's in trouble now. A black boy has run two white guys off the road, and he's in Baton Rouge. He's in big trouble. So he said that he was in jail worrying, and his mother showed up with the reverend, and he looked outside. They let him out of the jail, and we looked outside. It was filled with black people. There are a lot of black folks in Louisiana. The Klan had been out there before, and all these black people in the congregation showed up, and he walked out, so that converted him. But at the end, he leaned forward, he said, "Young man, you were meant to do this job. You really know your history, and I I want to thank you. It's really been a pleasure to be interviewed by you." And I looked over at Juliana, but she had gone to the bathroom.
But Larry, he was prescient in his view. Okay.
My first interview.
His first interview. But that would be the first of many, and that was about that year or later, I think we started the Knight Foundation.
Yeah, we started that year. The Knight Foundation provided a grant that sent us to a lot of cities. That
28 cities.
I don't think Juliana would have wanted us to go to those cities, like Aberdeen, South Dakota. We went to Omaha. We went to Wichita, Kansas. But so we had to find black. We didn't know the notable black people in those cities, so we had to do research, try to figure out who has done something here that's worthy of being interviewed. Right. We just didn't know.
Right. And one of them was, I want to go to Fort Wayne, because in Fort Wayne you have a finding, and both you and Scott are very animated about this interview with Al Stiles. So let's take a look at that.
Okay, Al Stiles, he grew up in Tampa, I guess, Florida. He was an entertainer on the beach, and he and his he had a little friend. He was 11. His little friend was 9, and they would perform with a can on the beach. And people would put money in the can. They decided at some point that they were going to be on the Major Bowes Talent Show, which is a big radio program on CBS that came on every Thursday night. So this is his story of how he and his friend go to Major Bowes.
Supposed to get an application and send it in, and then tell them when you would be in the New York area, and then they would get back and tell you when to come. But we didn't do none of that. We just went on. And when we got to Columbia, South Carolina, then I think I sent a telegram home saying we're on our way to New York. Man, my mom and them, they run down to the juvenile authorities and everything. But nobody couldn't catch us, because we didn't even know where we was going.
Now, talk, because Al Stiles is a character. I mean, I think he's 9, and he's
11 and his friend is 9. But Al Stiles goes on now. We're going to have more about his journey to Major Bowes, but he goes on to become like a entertainer. He travels with Josephine Baker in Europe and everything. He comes back to Fort Wayne, and somehow he's either traveling through Fort Wayne with some musicians, and he gets drafted into World War II. And he meets a woman in Fort Wayne. He falls in love. He gets married. And she talks him out of becoming an entertainer. She says, that's not a life for a husband, traveling all the time. There's dope out there, other women, you don't need to be doing that. And so they had a son together, and he's working in a factory in Fort Wayne. And he said, guess what? She left me anyway.
I had heard that story, so they come back very animated about the story. But the two of them, after a lot of escapades, make it to New York. Let's take a look at this. Yeah.
And they had a receptionist sitting right there in the elevator. When we got off, we walked up there, and we said, we want to see Major Bowes. And she looked at us, she said, you can't see Major Bowes. I said, why? She said, you just can't see him. She said, where you guys from? Tampa, Florida. We was just so, we wasn't scared of nothing. So she looked at us and we said, how did y'all get here? On the bus. And we told her how we got there. She said, who's with you? Nobody. She said, you mean y'all came all the way from Tampa, Florida by yourself? Yeah. We was just ready to go, man. So I would think that what happened, we were so, and she probably called somebody and said, we got 2 boys here from Tampa, Florida, you need to see them, because they must be pretty good, because they're so confident, They're not scared or nothing, And so, she told us, she said, y'all go in that waiting room and sit down. We went in there, and man, we was talking to everybody. People was asking us where we was from, and we was talking, and we was just so happy, And so every time I think about it, it was really something else to see. And so here's 2 little old guys all the way from Tampa, Florida, and they ain't a spread of nobody, talking to everybody, outgoing, And so pretty soon I looked up at the door, and this guy was standing there beckoning at me, and And he said, yeah. And then he did my partner the same and took us down in the hall, man, and auditioned us. And when we got to audition, I knew we was going to be on the show because he told us to be back down there the next day at 11 o'clock for rehearsal. And there we were, man, got in New York on a Tuesday, and we going to broadcast on Thursday. And so I got, as soon as we came out of the studio, I went and sent my mama a wire. Or did I call her? I either wired or called her and told her we was going to be on Major Bull's advertising. Man, she got on her bicycle and went all over town to tell everybody, turn on your radio tomorrow night, I was going to broadcast on Major Bull. You know, blah, 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 blah.
Isn't that wonderful? It is wonderful. I mean, that's so wonderful. There's so many. Here, Larry, let's. There's so many stories in the archive. I mean, so many stories, and I'm hoping that you'll take advantage of it. But it turns out that Al Stiles, actually, we also introduced family members, right? Because we introduced him to Bernard Kinsey, and that was his uncle. And I
didn't even know that until yesterday. I thought they knew each other already. But Bernard Kinsey has one of the great art collections. Black art collections. There are about 4 big black art collections that tour the country. And Bernard and Shirley Kinsey have 3 collections touring at any given time. One's in Europe and Asia, run by their son. Then they have 2 going here. The last time it was close here was in Cincinnati at the Underground Railroad Museum. And the lead painting on the brochure was, I wanted to get a copy of it because it was a brother. It was painted in a 1930s style. It was a brother with his family, and they were planting books in a garden. They're planting books, and I said, "Who did that?" I looked it up on the internet, and a brother named Samuel Dunson from Trotwood did it, who taught at Fisk and Vanderbilt. You know. It just came right back.
Yeah, I mean, Larry, we would do a disservice to all of you in the room not to talk about, our interview process because because of monetary concerns, we don't, when we go into a city, we're doing 8 to 10 interviews. And we start at 8 in the morning and may finish 8 or 9 o'clock at night. It is not for the faint of heart. I want you to talk about like some of your, the interviews that you have favorite memories of.
That always paralyzes me. Oh. No, but there's a lot of them.
I can help you. What about Maulana Karenga?
Oh, Maulana. Yeah. We interviewed Maulana Karenga, the founder of Kwanzaa and the founder of the Nguzo Saba and Kawida theory. And it was interesting because what we have with him, I don't think anybody else has. Because most of our interviews, we start off with asking people about their ancestors. And then we ask them about their mother and father's side of the family separately. Then we get into growing up. Nobody's ever asked him about that. He said, well, why do you want to know that? Basically, that's what he said, why do you want to know that? Brother Kunguru, he calls me Kunguru because that's Crowe and Kiswahili, But I know him. I know Maulana Karenga. I don't know him well, but I know him. I know who he is and have had discussions with him. So, but he told us about growing up, being a 7th son of a 7th son in Eastern Shore of Maryland. That's where he grew up. And his brother was a scholar, taught at Michigan State. And a lot of stuff about him nobody would know, if it wasn't for our interview.
Right. So, but there are other, you've talked very, I would say passionately about even the documentation that we have about, the National Black Arts Movement.
Right, right. A lot of stuff about the black organizations. Now, organizations, anybody knows me, I talk about institutions a lot. We need to institutionalize. We need to organize. But the people I've interviewed, we've had discussions about the National Bar Association. National Medical Association. These are black organizations. You know, we just about every profession, the National Black Political Assembly, the Congressional Black Caucus, the Black Police have an organization, the Black Firefighters have an organization. So I've talked to the presidents and the leaders of the sororities and fraternities and other black organizations around the country, members of ASCAC, the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, Asa Hilliard, people like that. So we have like a lot of organizational information that is, the black coaches even formed an organization at one time. Everybody, black school teachers, eventually you're going to do that if you're black and American. If you don't, you are out of the loop. You are stupid. You're going to have to form an organization. You got to organize. Kwame Ture used to say it all the time. He said, I don't care if you get in the Boy Scouts or the Black Panthers, you should be in some organization trying to make some change. And that's what we have to do in times like these.
That's right. But, Larry, we have, because of Larry and his inside knowledge of who the actors were in either community policing and police brutality, we have a world-class record of that. And it's being used in colleges and universities. I mean, a lot of it, I think of Pat Hill,
yeah.
And her role. And
Howard Saffold, Pat Hill, Renault Robinson. We had Leon Frazier here in Dayton, and this reminds me of something I haven't talked about. And a key factor in growing up was watching television, believe it or not. You can ask my sisters. I watched a lot of TV. But one of the shows that caught my interest as a teenager was the Phil Donahue Show. Phil Donahue started here in Dayton, and he brought Dick Gregory here, Flo Kennedy, all the major civil rights leaders. They all came here to Dayton. Darlene Hayes used to work at the Y on Fifth Street. She was his producer, and she's still alive. We need to interview her. But I saw one after another, all these luminaries. And then when I was in school, I would go to, if they didn't come to Wright State, I'd go to Central State to see somebody speak, And the world was, that's how I learned about the world.
Right. And so that is essentially, I mean, when you think about it, the community has helped inform our archives in many ways, people referring us to other people and all of that. I want to, Larry, do you ever think on this side of things, because you've been doing the work now for 24 years. Mm-hmm. Do you ever think about, or do you ever like go into the collection and yourself do like we're doing here? And do you ever think about the enormity of what we've been able to accomplish?
Yes. And thank you for doing this today, because I think a lot of people in Dayton, when I tell them what I do, they have no idea. They just kind of glaze over. They know I'm out of town. I'm going out of town, but they don't know what I'm doing, this makes it clear, and it is enormous. It's big. You don't want to tell people, I do something that's so big that, they get run out of the room,
But I mean, do you think because it's been hard work. I mean, there was never money in the organization. I'm always, pressing people. Like he said, this is a really important interview. I mean, there were all these things, but we kept the cameras running. And in the early years, we used to keep them out on the road for like 3 weeks at a time. Yeah. That turned out that didn't work.
No.
Because you talk about, remember Ernest Withers?
Oh, Ernest Withers, yeah. Well, just another road story, but it has Ernest Withers is a famous photographer from Memphis who had a studio on Beale Street, and he shot all the civil rights leaders and Elvis Presley and all that group, the Barcades. And so we showed up to interview him, and he wasn't there, So we had driven up from Chicago to Memphis, to interview him. And we were going to be there a week interviewing people, but he wasn't there, and we had to wait. I said, it's all right, we set up first. So they called him, he said, okay. So we sat there, and he finally came about an hour and a half later, and he said, do you have any money for me? I said, no. I mean, this was set up like weeks ago. This is a non-for-profit. You know that. We don't have any money. He said, well, I can't do it. So he got on the phone. He talked to his lawyer and he said, no, I can't do it. I'm sorry. Bye. So we had to pack up and go and leave. A week later, we're getting ready to leave, and I get a call from Juliana.
Me, because I'm at an airport, and I get them, and we had worked on Ernest Withers' interview, and so the fact that they couldn't do the interview, and I told them they had to leave, then his manager calls and is apologetic, and they're on their way to the airport. And
no, not the airport, to drive back to Chicago.
And
that's what we were doing.
Oh, and I told them to go back. And that's how and they were like none too happy. I'm like, you turn around and you go back and do that interview. And because
we did it. The interesting thing is Ernest Withers later on was found to be an FBI informant.
That's right.
Now, this is complicated.
Acknowledged by people.
Acknowledged by people. I mean, it's in the FBI record. I mean, one of his chief defenders on the internet was Paul Lee, who's a great unsung historian from Detroit. Paul wrote me and said, Mr. Withers would never do that. He's a self-sacrificing. I said, well, he's the only one that ever asked me for money. And I said, if you go to the Memphis Commercial Appeal to the article online, which Paul was capable of doing, you can see the redacted FBI papers, and they failed to redact some of the codes that indicated that Mr. Withers was a paid informant. And he probably did it for the money, but Andy Young came back and said, Mr. Withers probably told him something that anybody could find out. But how are you going to, this raises a dilemma in your head. What would happen if the FBI came to you and said, you should inform on somebody or else, basically, that's what they're really telling you. So what are you going to do? And that's, so I think Ernest Withers, some people have vilified him. I think he probably told them stuff they already knew. He took the money. And that was it.
Yeah. But there are a lot of things in the collection that we're learning, and that, that it will provide the groundwork for other people to do important research. And that's why I want to encourage everyone to really take this opportunity to get in and dig deep. And you will see Larry Crowe over and over again as he's guiding people through these, interviews. I do, Larry, we're going to end with looking at Margaret Peters, and I was glad to meet her daughter here.
And his sister, too.
We live in these really interesting times. Think about the family that raised you and your sisters. They were hardworking people, and everything that people work for right now in the Black community and the Black experience is really under attack. And, the communities have changed in major, major ways. But Margaret Peters, she's talking about the importance of our history.
Yeah, and when I interviewed her, it's important. Like, she starts with her family. She talks about her father, Joseph Peters, and other family members. Her brother had a photographic memory. When I think of myself, and I know you're a strong family person.
I'm a strong.
When I think about my family, it's small, but it's strong. Even my ex-wife's family, the Stewarts, I always tell people about them. They're a powerful group. They all love each other. There's millions of them, too. The Armstrongs, my Olabisi's family, they're a strong group of geniuses. When you get into detail, all the individual members, you get a lot of, we have a group here in Dayton called the Dayton Africana Elders Council. Mama Nozipo is sitting in the front row here. Mama Nozipo, we call her Mama Paparazzi. She shoots so many pictures, but she's from Cape Town. She's been here since 1973. David Driscoll let her stay at his house when she had no place to stay in Nashville. These stories intersect, and that's the thing that's profound to me. After I've done so many, I can listen to somebody, like I listen to stories that Dale Smith used to tell me about growing up, going back to Mississippi and Tennessee to visit his relatives, and that informs stuff I'm doing today. When I interview somebody that grew up there, his daddy was shot in the Korean War. So was my ex-wife's daddy, Charlie Stewart. He was shot in the Korean War. And for a while, everybody I met who was black, who was a Korean War vet, had been shot or stabbed or something in a war. But these stories cross-reference and intersect, and you can do what I do in my head by going to the archive and searching. And you can see, I mean, I was hoping that Karen would do it when she was on stage, but one of the things we did like 2 months ago, remember when we pulled up the archive, we typed in Dayton.
Yeah, we
and
should
just looked
type
at
in
all
Dayton. Can
the
we do that real quick?
all the references to Dayton in the archives. Now Dayton, of course, some of us think it's the most important place on earth, but
He does too.
it is, but there are other places you can put in Philly or Harlem or anything and get all these references. They're cross references. What people said throughout this collection of 4,000 interviews about these different places.
Yeah, there are literally, you have, like if you put in Dayton, you get over 1,000. And think about it, we haven't done that many, but people are talking, there are all these references to where people grew up or their experiences or where they worked and all of that is there. But I guess, okay.
Yeah, there's Bernice Sumlin. They're the people we interviewed all, but there are other people. There's Roderick Pugh, whose father was a doctor on West Fifth Street. He grew up in Dayton. And we interviewed him in Chicago. We had no idea he grew up here.
I just want to show you in the background. So if you put into the search entry, you will see, I just put in Dayton, Ohio, and there are 954 stories matching Dayton, Ohio. Yeah, and one of the great things, of course, that they have been able to do, if you want to click over here, you wanted to know what type of history maker there are. There's everything from a civic maker, an education maker, to a military maker and style maker. You can also be able to separate by gender. And so let's say if you wanted to just know, tell me about African-American females. Yeah, and so it's a wonderful,
Karen, you can
wonderful
come
website.
on staff.
Oh, well, thank you. I play with it all the time because I'm just so interested, of course, in the work that I do. So I'm going to let you go ahead and finish. And again, thank you for recognizing my aunt, Margaret Peters.
Well, no, and that's what we want to go. So let's go to this. It's a very appropriate clip to end on. So let's go.
You think it's going to come out of the public schools? Do you think we need to put it in our institution, our churches and other institutions?
Yeah, I really think that for it to be taught truthfully, it needs to be taught in the black churches and fraternal organizations and clubs, in part because a lot of the teachers aren't equipped to teach it, and also because all of this overemphasis on testing means that teachers have to teach what the children are going to be tested on. And unfortunately, that means overemphasis on testing. And there simply is not space in the curriculum to teach what needs to be taught. It
hasn't made the space in the curriculum to make Black history a part of what you're going to be testing
No,
about.
I mean, the 2 omissions that we mentioned earlier from the 7th grade, and that was for the entire state. And I'm afraid that that's not a rarity. Black history is simply not a priority in terms of what they think children need to learn. And I believe it is. And I think we're just going to have to teach it ourselves. Malcolm said that that's one thing we need to do. Jewish people don't depend on the schools to teach their history to their children. They teach it in their temples, they teach it in their homes, teach it in their synagogues. And we need to do the same thing.
It also affords you more control over what you teach.
Right. Because I had one young man who, honor student, had never heard of Frederick Douglass.
Now think about that. I mean, this interview was done 20 years ago, Larry. It looks like child's play to what we have now. There are 18 states that have passed anti-CRT laws. Dayton may be blue, but Ohio is red. And you are part of that backward trend here. And she's forewarning. And I remember I think it was late last year, I started thinking like, we've done all this work and we can't get it into the schools. It's limited, things are under attack. And I start thinking we have to go back to the churches, And so that's where we are. But you know, we're still in the sandbox working together. And I want to ask you, because how we end our interviews is we ask people what they want their legacy to be. And you know, I'm wondering, Larry Crowe, what do you want your legacy to be?
This is always a scary question. When I ask it to people, they always like, you know. But I would say that if you were going to remember me, you'd probably remember somebody that wasn't afraid to ask questions, wasn't afraid when he was a kid to be a square, wasn't afraid to read. And, you know, one of the things that kind of made my life worthwhile, when I came back to Dayton, I was in the Kroger's, and I ran into a brother I knew from Dayton, and he said, he had his son with him, and he said, this is Larry Crowe. And his son said, well, who is, he just looks at what? He said, he's a made guy. Not meaning I was made by the mafia, but in terms of our history and culture, I'm a made guy. And I said, yeah, I guess I am, you know. But yeah, so I get boosted every week by Greg Kamathi Carr on the on YouTube and everything. But he's, you know, I feel like he and I, John Henry Clark, I can talk about Jacob Carruthers, Asa here. We're part of a reading cult, as John Henry Clark used to say, and dedicated to reading and being the experts in our own history and culture.
You know, Larry, I'm going to go a little step forward. Thank you for that. I'm going to go a little step forward because all of them have done great things and they've educated us, but none of them have been in the record preservation business like you have. And all of them will stand to benefit from the work that you did for us. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, you know, for doing it with integrity, for not, and that for what happened is God brought us together, and you know, our mighty team. And I just want to thank you. And I really am pleased to be here in Dayton in your home, and I'm pleased that we have this opportunity today. So thank you for everything. I want to thank the audience for everything.
Thanks for everybody that came out, and I'm looking forward to boring you all again with facts. And
No, now we have two other parts of the program. We're going to have lunch, but we would like to open up for some Q&A just a little bit, and then we're going to be in the computer labs where 15 people can come in at a time, and we can do, you know, give you some hands-on experience. And then we'd love you to come back. I mean, not leave us, but we're going to be back in this room at 1, where we'll do oral history training. You can see our process, which we take very great strides to make right. So Larry and I will be tag teaming that. So are there questions? Yeah. Oh. Do you have a mic?
Check.
He's about to give him that. I'm just saying.
oh, what happened?
There's a saying, and I'm probably not quoting it right, but that history is determined by the victors. Can you help us understand this time that we're living in and the context of that and what you've archived here?
Yes, yeah, I've heard that saying, but you know, my wife and I, Ola Beast, we wrote a book last year about Dayton's Black history,
Yes.
and there are a lot of things that happen in Dayton that don't necessarily aren't necessarily heroic to other people, but they're heroic to us. So we have to decide what's important for us, and whether. If we're making the record, whether we won or lost, we should tell the truth about what happened so that we can learn from it. And we should make sure we teach our children, you know, what that truth is. So the victors' narrative, they're passing bills now to make sure you only teach this whitewash history in the public schools and the colleges and everywhere else. But nobody can stop us from telling our own story to our own people. Nobody can stop us. And we know more now than we ever knew.
Yep.
Nobody can take that away from us.
That's right. Any other questions? I also think on that, that's why I believe in the archives, because I often tell anyone using the archives and scholars, don't come with your own perceived notion when you're searching. Let the archives speak, because it speaks the truth, and there are things that are found there that you can't find any other place. And I believe in self-agency, that, we still are working, but we've always been self-actors in our own history. It's just that sometimes we are not as aware of it as we should be. Mike?
If you don't mind, I'm not going to stand up and recap. First of all, I appreciate this opportunity to come to this venue. I've been studying African American history as well as African history from way in the past, but so I find this very interesting. What I want to ask is, how do you feel about when you talk about education in the churches? Because that's where I've been fighting for the past 30, 35 years. And because most of the clergy, they have different agendas. And also when you look into history and what we need to do to overcome voters' rights and all that, a lot of the clergy want you to think that it's demonic in the work that we do, and therefore there's more turning people away from that type of research and knowledge. Knowledge has always been criticized in the black community and the churches, and so what would you say as far as to continue to press on, just the fact that we deal with that issue of a lack of willingness to educate our children, get them interested in information like this through the churches?
Well, I want to say that now the church that we grew up in has changed. I want to say that. And we have a religion category, and I remember interviewing Reverend Dr. McMichael. And tears started coming to my eyes, because I remember the church was our gathering point, and there hasn't been a lot of documentation. Howard Dodson at the Schomburg had tried to do some documentation on our black church. But we're all going to be getting religion if we haven't gotten it soon. And we're going to, and we also we're being forced back into the box together. If we thought that we had gotten out of the box and had our own pathway, we're being put back in that box together. And that's a place, a gathering place that's, I think it's important, and we're going to have to get back to religion in some way, because all the things that, the mother wit, the Negro spirituals, all those things that we created in hard times got us through. And we have to go back to them, because that's in many ways will be our salvation. So that's what I want to say about that. Yeah.
Well, could I?
Of course.
Yeah, we the model that we followed in the early 70s, and people are doing it all over the country now, which includes pastors and people involved in Islam and other religions, other forms of spirituality, is that we form study groups where at some point you have to remove religion from the discussion of history, because they're not the same thing.
That's true.
That's why when you go to college and you study the history of the Roman Empire, you're not studying the same thing you study in the Bible. They're two separate things. And you'd think they would be the same, but they are not. And so you have to have enough flexibility to be able to understand the difference and sometimes you don't. So we had like a secular organization here that studied African history and culture called Al Kebulan and Msengi Wakwele. We used to meet in a bookstore, in the aisles of the bookstore, and go over a book. We had a book study. Wendell Peters would do an African country every week, and we had like, it was back in Harlem in the 1920s. They had something called the Harlem History Club that lasted until World War II, where Dr. Willis Huggins, the young John Henry Clark, John Jackson, Kwame Nkrumah would visit, and Nnamdi Azikiwe from Nigeria. He was at Lincoln University then. They would come, J.A. Rogers, and they would talk about Black history and culture. Ella Baker used to attend, and so did there were quite a few others. But we have an intellectual tradition that it can happen in the church, but you can't let religion stop you from learning.
That's right. I was just, Larry's absolutely right. It's whatever meeting place that we can gather and learn and study, which is going to be really important. Yeah. Okay. Here's one here in the front. Oh. Okay, sure.
I just want to say thank you for inviting us. This is so significant for especially we that are writers to be present. Dayton has such a rich history, and I just want to know, how do we present that history to be archived? I'm Hassani Scott Matthews. My dad was the first chief of police that never got recognized for it. C.J. McLean pushed him out there at Jefferson Township, and he served for over 20 years. I'm looking at our first mayor's daughter sitting in the audience who's not been recognized. He's gone now, but she and her sister have a wealth of information about him. C.J. McLean is not listed. So where do we go? My husband, David Matthews, who was a discovery of Nikki Giovanni, who snatched him out of college in 1972 and has won a multitude of awards, has toured over 300 colleges in 21 states and abroad. How do we get that mentioned?
Yeah.
So this seminar, workshop, love that's being presented is just wonderful for me to experience, because I grew up here in Dayton, and there's so many stories of people that have done so many things. How do we get that to you guys? I mean, like, I don't know Mr. Crowe. He's grew up with my husband on the same street, but he's everywhere. Like he said, he's only one man. How do we get that to you guys for consideration?
I got a good answer for that, and that's, I advise people everywhere to take your phone out or whatever recording device you have and record your relatives. Start with the elders. Record their stories. Like, you should never be walking around and not know where your parents went to school or where they grew up, or, what was important to them. And then, everybody's got to tell their story. And the stories have to be written down or recorded. And now we can record them. We can video them now. Everybody can do that. Everybody has access to that kind of media today that we didn't have in the past. I know we have in our collection old audio tapes that people did and all kind of things. I've got a audio tape that Brother Basim, who was just sitting over there a minute ago, gave me of one of our other great historians, speaking here in the Yellow Springs on his radio show, and it's we have, we got to record our own history. Anytime you record it and keep it, you're helping to feed the bigger. This is a huge project, HistoryMakers, but our little family projects are huge too for the family.
They're all very important.
Yeah.
And I really believe that there will be a way that all of this can come together, but you have to preserve it first. But I believe that with technology, a lot of these things will come together. And what Larry said is really important. It starts with the family. There are times that we've interviewed people and they did not know the history that we had in our archives, so there are all these things, but we're in a crisis stage right now. I can't say it any more than that. We cannot lose the 20th century. If we lose the 20th century, this first quarter of the 21st century, except for the election of our first black president, it's backward trends. And so if we lose the golden goose, the time that we went from, Reconstruction to the marvelous things that happened, and they were all kinds of things going on. If we lose that documentation, we're screwed. And that's why, I don't sleep much, because I keep thinking, how are we going to do this? If you don't have a record of any kind, then there is nothing there. And that's what we have to take seriously. Yes.
Excuse me, just being cognizant of time, is going on 12:10.
Oh, no, we have to. Okay.
So I actually have to go to my next program, Pullman program, Pullman Porters. But
we can take one more and then we'll.
Yeah, but say, where do you want them to go?
We want
lunch?
the food is served over here, right in the back. I would there's this wonderful gallery over here that is a combination of Larry's work with us, but also his family history.
It contains the biggest baby picture of me I've ever seen.
It is so beautiful. You're handsome as a man, but you are rocking as a baby. I don't want to say that. But one more question here.
First of all, thank you very much for this wonderful program. I have so much on my heart and my mind that I want to talk to you all about. But I'll later perhaps. In 1994.
Can you put up the mic?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you again for this program. In 1994, I started my own oral history documentary project to document the history of African American Muslims. I converted to Islam at that time. I was converting at that time. And in that process, heard stories from older Muslims and watched their faces light up when they were telling their stories. And at the time I was training to be a television producer. I stopped doing the work eventually because it was difficult and there was no money. And I also became afraid of having such an archive, a national archive of Muslim stories in an Islamophobic country. So I'm sharing that because what you're being here has inspired me to pick that back up. I have a website, miracleinamerica.net, that has some of the stories that I've captured, some of the documentaries, shorts that I've captured. How do you keep going? How do you find money? And in your religion category, were there many Muslims that you interviewed?
Okay.
Not many. I'll say that, not many, but we need to do more. And we have a couple of Hebrew Israelites, but mostly Christians. Dayton, just for the record here, people don't, the oldest mosque built by an African American community is here in Dayton. The one on Randolph Street that the Ahmadiyas built. That's and Ahmadiyya is big in Dayton and Detroit and I think in New Jersey and some places, but it's apocryphal to traditional Islam, I think, in a way. But I don't know how they would argue that, theologically. But
so I want to say that we've done some, not enough, and the concern about, I do have concerns about the stories, but more from the protection of the people who are speaking. I feel more comfortable in some cases. People say lots of things in these interviews. And so I want to protect them. I'm very protective, but I also want to educate. So I think that, there are people, only 2 people have asked for their interviews to be sealed. And, we allow that. But I think it's way more the recording. And there's a gentleman I've been talking to back and forth who has a large recordation of the Muslim community, the black Muslim community in Detroit. And we've been talking about how we work to save it. I think it's more, how do we work together? You know, we don't have to be in separate camps. We're all in this history preservation, recordation business together. Yeah.
In another sense, anything you're doing specific and you're doing a deep dive into informs the bigger picture.
That's right.
At a higher level. So what you're doing, you should definitely keep doing what you're doing, and we should consult with you about, I mean, we've consulted with people who are supposed to be experts on Negro League baseball, for instance, or physicists, and know all the black physicists. There was a website called Physicists of the African Diaspora. I love that. They listed all the black physicists. The first black PhD in the country was Edward Boucher, a physicist out of Yale, in 1880 something. That's right. But somebody needs to, when you extract the history of any specific group like that, or a local group from a locality and stuff, you are adding to the picture
to everything, and there may
Yeah.
be ways that we can work together. That's all. All I'm saying. But money has always been our issue. So I think that we're going to end right now. Food is served. We have sandwiches and everything. Join us, Larry, and I'll be separated unless you want to, just talk to him. I'll be in the computer lab just showing more. And then I think if you come back for the oral history training, you'll enjoy that. It'll be interactive and we can tell some more stories. Thank you. Oh, you mean say that again? Right, well, we can only fit 15 at a time. But anyone who wants to get their lunch, and if you want to do that, we'll do some show and tell. And Kim, I want to thank you once again, and I want to thank Aaron and Scott and Carol, because okay, because this has been. Thank you very much.
Thank y'all so much.